Hi all! There will be a few weeks of reruns for The Story Behind coming up. I'm going to be taking a break to go to Podfest down in Orlando from March 6th through the 10th, so if you're attending the event, please come say hi. I'm also going to be doing some other exciting things with The Story Behind in the next few weeks, so be sure to follow @StoryBehindPod on Twitter and Instagram for more information. I'll be showcasing some old favorite episodes on the show, including some of my favorite series. Don't worry, the new Patreon exclusive episode will be out for March, and I'll still be hanging out in the Story Behind discussion group on Facebook, and your posts for Trivia Tuesday will be read on future episodes. Thank you again for all your support and your kind words. There have been a lot of exciting things for The Story Behind already in 2019, and it's all because of you. So, thank you. In 1994, a movie came along about a man of low intelligence who happens to hit a few lucky breaks, weaving himself in and out of the timeline of American history and into the hearts of millions of moviegoers. That man was Forrest Gump. For the month of February, I'll be focusing episode topics on the historical and pop culture references in the movie, ones you may have missed when watching the film because of the overwhelming emotion attached to every scene, or ones you may only be familiar with on the surface. In this episode, we'll be talking about the popular Victorian parlor sport and how it led to the first Americans visiting China in 20 years, breaking what was known then as the bamboo curtain. I'm your host, Emily Prokop, and this is the story behind Ping-Pong.
For some reason, Ping-Pong came very natural to me.
See, any idiot can play.
So I started playing it all the time. I played Ping-Pong even when I didn't have anyone to play Ping-Pong with. I was so good that some years later, the Army decided that I should be on the All-America Ping-Pong team. We were the first Americans to visit the land of China in like a million years or something like that. Somebody said world peace was in our hands. But all I did was play Ping-Pong.
Back in the 1800s, lawn tennis was a popular game among the elite in Victorian England, India, and South Africa. When people wanted to bring the game indoors for the winter or inclement weather, they improvised equipment, using dining tables and stacks of books for nets, rubber balls or rounded champagne cork tops for balls, and books or cigar box tops as paddles. What we now know as ping-pong had a number of different names before that, including whiff-waff, gossamer, flim-flam, and pim-pam. If you're looking for ping-pong as an Olympic sport, though, you won't find it listed. You'll see it referred to as table tennis because the name ping-pong is actually trademarked by Parker Brothers. But it ends up being so genericized, you might not realize it, like the word dumpster or crock-pot. The Ping Pong Association even had to change its name to the Table Tennis Association in 1922. When sandwich rubber was invented in 1950, it was a game changer. Literally. Sandwich rubber is what you see on the table tennis paddle, which is sponged with a layer of rubber over it. When the Japanese introduced this to the game, players were able to put spin on the ball and hit it in ways they couldn't before. And the International Tennis Table Federation quickly added new regulations concerning the use of the new paddles in play. The rules and regulations needed to be changed again after 2000, when more games were being televised. In order to attract a larger audience and keep their attention, the 21-point scoring system was brought down to 11, and the size of the ball was increased for better television visibility. The extra size of the ball also increased the ball's heaviness, which slowed down the game for visibility as well. This is before we all had high-def, flat-screen televisions, by the way. Believe it or not, there are an estimated 40 million competitive table tennis players in the world, and even more millions who play it recreationally. I don't know if this number includes beer pong, but it is interesting to note that beer pong was invented in 1950 at a Dartmouth College fraternity, which originally involved paddles and later evolved into the drinking game most college students and adults know today. Ping-pong, though, is probably most popular in China, which you may remember being referenced in Forrest Gump. When we hear about the Cold War, Many probably think it was between the West and Soviet Russia, but in the instance in which we call the Iron Curtain separating the Soviet bloc from the Western world, there was another curtain, known as the Bamboo Curtain, that separated Communist China from the United States, following Mao Zedong's 1949 revolution. More than 20 years later, China's ties with the USSR were beginning to sour, and Chairman Mao began to look for ways to open up communication with the United States again. This fell at the same time President Richard Nixon had made relations with China one of his top priorities. When Glenn Cowan, a 19-year-old professional U.S. ping-pong player, boarded a shuttle bus during the 1971 World Table Tennis Championship, Zhang Zedong, a player from the Chinese national team who was also on the shuttle, stepped up to him and shook his hand, speaking to him through an interpreter, and presented Cowan with a silkscreen picture of China's Huangshan Mountains. The next day, Cowan presented Zedong with a t-shirt with a peace symbol and the words "Let it be" on it. Originally, the Chinese players were told not to speak to the Americans, but after the photographs of the exchange circulated in newspapers in China and the U.S., Chairman Mao invited the U.S. team to an all-expense trip to play ping-pong in China, which is what you see in the movie Forrest Gump, and it became known as ping-pong diplomacy. China was vastly different from anything the U.S. team had ever seen before, and the stigma of Americans hadn't fully worn off by the time they arrived. Even the banners welcoming the team were hung over graffiti that said, "Down with the Yankee oppressors and their running dogs." But political leaders made sure the Americans were treated as welcome guests. At a banquet in April of 1971, Premier Zhou Enlai told the team and the press,
"You have opened a new chapter in the relations of the American and Chinese people. I am confident that this beginning again of our friendship will certainly meet with majority support of our two peoples."
The next day, the 20-year trade embargo with China was lifted by the United States.
Never before in history has a sport been used so effectively as a tool of international diplomacy.
In the movie, Forrest Gump is shown being so good at ping-pong. Those in the hospital with him were so entranced by his playing, they are shown surrounding him at a ping-pong table, instead of in front of the television, showing Apollo 11 landing on the moon in 1969. When Forrest is taught to play ping-pong, he is told to never take his eyes off the ball, and if you watch Tom Hanks in these scenes, you'll notice he doesn't even blink. This may be easier for a seasoned ping-pong player to do, but it's a natural reflex to blink sometimes if an object is coming toward you. So, was Tom Hanks just that good? Well, yes, because he's Tom Hanks, but also because many of his ping-pong scenes were shot without a ball, including the intense match he has with China. The ping-pong ball was added in later with the help of computer-generated imagery, or CGI. Hanks and his Chinese opponent, listed in the credits as Valentine, listened to a metronome and timed their swats to the clicks, and the ball was added in later. The movie was known for its use of computer graphics, like inserting Tom Hanks into historical footage seemingly, removing Gary Sinise's legs for his character Lieutenant Dan, and even the floating feather seen at the beginning and end of the movie was computer-generated. It's no wonder the movie took the Oscar for Best Visual Effects in 1995, as one of its 6 that year. The role of Premier Zhou Enlai was played by Fear from Fearcast and Fifthcast. Information for this episode was sourced from killerspin.com, olympic.org, pbs.org, history.com, the AV Club, and more links which can be found in the show notes at thestorybehindpodcast.com. Follow on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at StoryBehindPod, or subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you'll never miss an episode. Thanks for listening.